Assalamu alaikum, dear believers in Ramadan Mubarak. Welcome to the Talim for today. We're both virtual and online at Masjid Al Taqwa. Today, I'm Dr. Aisha El-Amin, and on behalf of Imam Tariq El-Amin and the Talim Committee, which is myself, Dr. Gloria Bashir, and Dr. Lana Allen, we thank you for joining us today, and we ask that if you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel for Masjid Al Taqwa, that you please do so. You can find our taleems as well as our khutbahs there. And if you have subscribed, share the link with a friend so that they can also benefit, inshallah, from the many words that we get from both our taleems and khutbahs. So today we have our beloved Imam Rabbani who is presenting, and he's going to be talking about the sciences that go along that are in the Quran.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And as I said, this is an introduction to the sciences of the Quran. And out of regard for, I think this is an appropriate time for us to look at the Quran and look at some of the history of the Quran and how it's come to be with us, especially in the form now, particularly in the form now that we're reading the Quran every day. So this kind of brings us up. We'll begin from the earliest moment in the course with the revelation of the Quran and try to come up to the present day in the form that it is in now. So yes, the Ramadan is the month of the Quran. The month, of course, as we're reading the Quran, is being recited throughout the Muslim world and all the masajids. It's being recited, many messages, the 30th of the Quran is being recited each night in the Taraweeh prayer. So this is a very beautiful time for us to think about the Quran, think about the history of the Quran and how it's come to be the book that we rely on for our guidance. I have an image of a fragment of the Quran from the very earliest period, maybe even far back as the 7th century, 8th or 7th century. I don't know if you all can see that, but I can tell you that it's one of the earliest scripts, fragments of a script from the Quran, long before the markings, which are called the diacritical marks or the tashkil, that enable us to read the Quran in different language and to be able to read the Arabic a little more accurately. And this say the science of the Quran, the term, the traditional title is Ulum al-Quran, Ulum meaning the knowledge of the Quran or the sciences of the Quran. I'm sure we're familiar with the word Alim or Alim, Rabbil Alameen, the Lord of the worlds, of the systems of knowledge. So Alimat means to know. So it's from the word Alimat, to know. Ulum al-Quran is the knowledge or the sciences of the Quran. And the word Quran itself refers to something that is to be read or recited or proclaimed. We often see the first revelation as being translated read, sometimes may see it recite or proclaim. So it's from the word qara'a, to the verb meaning to read. And the Quran is a verbal noun, which means the reading, a reading or a recitation. So the Quran came to us, of course, as we know, from the Prophet, prayers and peace be upon him. But the earlier revelations, in the Quran, it tells us of the earliest revelations, the previous revelations, and it's given to us in the Quran as the suhuf. The Arabic term is suhuf.
We're at the very beginning of the slideshow right now.
Slide number 3?
No.
Let's see. Okay, right there is good. Alhamdulillah. We're live. I hope you all can see this at home. This is a fragment. As I said, we were speaking about Ulum al-Quran. I was pointing out that that's the Arabic phrase for the sciences of the Quran. And that's a fragment of one of the earlier that was used for this cover of this particular book and this work called An Introduction to the Sciences of the Quran. The next slide provides for us just the word itself, Quran. We know it's a Quranic term. This is how the Prophet, prayers and peace, introduced it to us. The Quran actually introduces itself to us in this term. And this is the word which meaning, it's a verb with meaning to a reading or a recitation. Imam Muhammad used to interpret the word Quran as the promised reading, that it is the Quran. The Quran is the promised reading from the scriptures that have come before that Allah has promised to us. The next slide is a slide that points to the previous revelations, and these are mentioned in the Quran Suhufi Ibrahim wa Musa is actually the phrase in the Quran of the sheets of Abraham and Moses. So we like to start with the previous revelations. I think it's required of us when studying the Quran to understand what came before it, and it has evolved up until the time of the Prophet, prayers and peace be upon him. The Torah of Musa, we know that's mentioned in the Quran. The Torah, the Psalms of David, Zabur, I think is the Arabic term for Psalms. The Gospel of Jesus, I think we know the Arabic word for gospel is the Injil, as given as revealed to the Prophet in the Quran. And the Quran is as the final revelation to Prophet Muhammad, prayers and peace be upon him. And that is where it sits in the progression of revelation, and we know it to be the final revelation. The next slide, I believe, is the study of the Quran. These are some of the subtopics in studying the Quran. There's in classical studies of Islam, Islamic studies and classical studies of Islam, the Quran is studied by its revelation, how it's revealed. We talk about on the occasion of the Prophet, prayers and peace be upon him. We have Mecca and Medina surahs, what we see coming further down. But the Quran was revealed to Prophet Muhammad by what means? What medium? I think we all know that, right? The angel Jibril. The angel Jibril is that medium through which the revelation came to Prophet Muhammad. And when it came to him, we know how it came. It didn't come all at one time. It came in piecemeal. It came on different occasions, because that's another subtopic. It's Babu Nuzul, the occasions for revelations. And that's a study all by itself. And it's a beautiful study to see the situation, to see the Quran as a living book being revealed in living actual circumstances, sometimes very personal circumstances. Sometimes it could be someone asking the Prophet a question or some issue that arises during the life of the Prophet's prophethood. So the revelation is a study by itself. The collection of the revelation, if it's piecemeal and revealed at different times, it had to be recorded and then it had to be collected. And so this is the major view of the Quran. The history of the Quran is how it was revealed and then how it was memorized and how it was preserved through memory and then collected to come into, which we'll get to, what the circumstances were that helped us to arrive at the complete volume as we have it today. The order and arrangement, all these are subtopics. The Prophet himself was the main source for telling us what the order and the arrangement for the Quran would be as we have it today. Transcription from the oral to the script. We're going to see some interesting slides that point to that, how that came about. Reasons and occasions for revelations, we said, that's referred to as Babu Nuzul, the occasions for what inspired a situation where Allah sent the angel Jibril with a particular revelation of guidance. The division of the Mecca and Medina surahs, the Prophet, prayers and peace be upon him, was in Mecca for the first period, for the longest period. And surahs will begin there in Mecca. And then after the migration, the hijrah to Medina, more surahs came that was identified as the Medina surahs. The clear and unclear verses is also one of the studies of the Quran. I like to use the simple language to clear and unclear. Of course, I believe the Arabic term is the muhkamat and the mutashabihah. And the Surah Al-Baqarah points to verses that are very clear. The meanings are very clear, not hidden meanings, they're obvious meanings. And then there are those verses where they're allegorical, so they have to be interpreted in particular ways, specific ways. And lastly, the topic of abrogation. We can maybe have a little discussion on the topic of abrogation. The word is nesk and mansuk. And I'm sure all of us probably have can recall some verses that were revealed but no longer were relevant later on, as there was a gradual process. The next slide, where are we? Oh, the Cave of Hira. We were talking about this the other day. Cave of Hira. What is the Cave of Hira? Anybody? Anybody online, can they unmute? Is at a risk, right? If you allow people to unmute. If you have no background noise, we would love to have your input. If you would like to share some of your experiences with us. I know as I had a personal experience with the Cave of Hira. I was with Brother Roderick, Bashir, Abdul Khalid, and our delegation from the United States for Hajj, where we actually had the opportunity to climb the mountain. And being as young and enthusiastic as well, we took on the challenge. So we were able to climb this mountain, which is quite high. I think it's called a mount. I think a mount is not compared to a mountain. So the average person maybe can handle a mount, but a mountain we didn't need any gear or anything. It wasn't that kind of a mountain. It was just basically, it looked like the trails had been kind of beaten path, but the slope was such that it really didn't challenge us too much. But what is the Cave of Hira? It's the occasion, the location where the prophet first was given the first revelation in the Quran. The very first revelation was to the prophet, prayers, peace be on him, in the cave there of Mount Hira. I think we were talking about this the other day. Brother Salih was bringing up points that I had forgot about, how the prophet's wife, she used to bring him food. I thought I probably had heard that before, but hadn't registered on me that she would have to climb that mountain. I mean, it's not a small mountain. Most people, when they get to the foot of the mountain, you see the heard of a foothill, they quit. But those who are in much better shape. So I think people in certain regions like that, they're in a more physically fit way for the terrain, for the nature of that region. So this was the first, this was the first revelation of the video. And we know it came from as the prophet instructed us. It was given to him by the Archangel Jibril.
Yeah, just adding that, and so, I guess you kind of alluded to, but this was a part of the prophet, peace be upon him, his practice.
Yeah.
You know, that he visited this cave on a regular basis.
Yeah. And it's good when we study a topic that we want to see all the components, all the related components to it. And so, of course, the scholars are going to try to understand the history. And it was a practice, like Imam Tariq said, a practice of visiting. And they had a name for the group, that they weren't idolaters. They didn't cater to idolatry, the Hanafi. Hanafi.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Hunafa, yeah, the plural, Hunafa. Everyone wasn't taken in by the idols and that idol culture. I do recall, we took pictures while we were up there, of course, but I can remember seeing the Kaaba from up at the top of that mountain. Next slide, we'll move along because I know our time, we started a little late, so we'll have to expedite. The first revelation to the prophet began in the month of Ramadan of the year 610 Common Era. While in seclusion, we mentioned that Angel Jibril came to him and asked him to read. And this is, I think this is the quote of the prophet. Yeah, this is from a hadith of the prophet. He said, I do not know how to read. When the angel squeezed him, he gave that kind of impression, I think, right? The angel squeezing him. Pressure, he felt this pressure. And I think I had the rest of it, but I had to put it all down there. Because he said he squeezed him 3 times. And then here, this wording is, the quote here is that he called me for a 3rd time. And the different word may change with different hadiths. So I think the prophet probably expressed it that way. I don't think he was in the calmest sense right there, because he was shaken by the experience. So I can see him describe the angel as catching him. So he said he called him and said, this time, he said, that's when the revelation came from him or came to him or through him. Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, right? Then the second revelation that came, this is just background information, right? The second revelation is Surah Al-Mudathir, only 5 verses from that surah. Oh, you covered in your cloak, arise and warn thy Lord, the raiment purified, and so forth and so on. The third revelation, the scholars say, was Al-Fatiha. So that's the question I had. When was Al-Fatiha revealed? The next slide, let's see, we have the collection and compilation phase 1. And it seems like there were 2, I would say, from the study of this history, there are 2 phases. And this is a quote this is from a book written by S. Maududi. And I think he covers the issues, all the major aspects of this collecting of the Quran and revealing and compilation of the Quran. The background is what? These were people who were not read. These were people, this was not a literate society, not a literate community. The alphabet was not the 28 letters we have. And we're going to see how really we're talking about the evolution of a language. The Quran brought about the evolution of the Arabic language. It's not that there was some that could not read, but there was some who could read. Matter of fact, read and write. It's written that Khadija's uncle, Waraka ibn Afel, said he had converted to Christianity and he actually wrote gospels in Arabic. So there was some who could read. There's Uthman, they say he could read and write. So there were those few who could read and write. But with the background, thinking of how the prophet cannot is one who's not reading and writing, and the majority of them cannot read and write. And the revelation is coming. How is this kind of revelation going to be sustained? How is it going to be preserved? So he points to Maududi points. He says, as a quote, no sooner was a passage of the Quran revealed than it was recorded on leaves of date palm. So we think of something just oral. How are we going to preserve it? And we're talking 1400 years later. So from that point to this point, there had to be some conscious process, right? There had to be really a strategic system to preserve it. And in the way of reveal, with so many scribes and so many of the companions of the prophet recording and writing and memorizing, how do we guarantee that they all will have the exact same Quran that we have today? And that's a long, long process. But there's so many elements in it that I think in conclusion, you would have to say that Allah protected it from its infancy to the finished product that we have today. So, but this is helpful insight. He said, no sooner was the passage of the Quran revealed than it was recorded on leaves. Paper was not invented yet in the 7th century. So then leaves, date palms, tree bark, bones, etc. And whatever flat material I think that they could get to use. And the dictation of the prophet and all these pieces were put into a bag. So there was a consciousness of preservation, that it was a need to preserve what was coming to the prophet and what we knew we needed to preserve. And they were going, and one of the things that also added to it was, as he mentions here, they were recited during the prayers. So the memorization aspect of the revelation being protected, preserved in the community environment, these were some of the elements. So I said, as mentioned that during the prayer, all this helped to reinforce the memorization, and all they would. And so if there was a group praying, the group would know the Imam's recitation if it's correct or not, right? Because they would correct the Imam if there was a question about it. The next slide is an example. What does it say? A page from the copy of the Holy Quran from the Caliph Uthman, which was, this is in Uzbekistan. So this obviously after Islam has spread throughout the Middle East, has spread westward, right? Far west. And these are some of the early letters. I think we even have some samples here, the message of the same Arabic script, early Arabic script, before the Fatah Kestra Dhamma that we're embracing today, right? But it says this is Surah 2, verse 7 through 10. So this could have been read at the time. They could read, they knew what the words were at the time without the vowel marking, probably just because they knew the words. So the next slide, I think, is another sample. Yes, 2 samples. Again, it's another surah. They know what surah this is. They know what the verse is. No problem for that time and that level of language, Arabic language at that time of the Quran. The dots began to, so these dots came later. So they were looking for ways to better express the Quran, because they had the words, they had the verses, they had the phrasing. They just needed a script to match and to equal the recitation. So the next slide. This is even, you can see an even more evolved form of the Arabic script. This is from what century is that? 8th century, end of the 8th century. That 8th, the 700.
Second is probably the Islamic calendar.
That's the calendar, yeah. Second is the Islamic calendar, Hijra date, and 8th is the common era century. So it's the 700s. It has a few vowel marks and some indication of the verse ending. So that was another thing that had to be addressed in creating, let's say, called the Quranic architecture. We had to know where the verses ended, where the surahs ended, and where they began. And they could tell from the language what was the end of a phrase or what was the end of a verse. So what's our next slide? Here's one now this is one we can read, right? Now we've evolved to the point where we have all the vowel markings short, Fatah Castle Dam, and all the long markings. And I'm sure Imam Tariq could read those. That's because it's a verses we're familiar with.
Yeah.
Al-Baqarah, verse 5 through 13 is beautiful. The one on the left is from North Africa. It's a Margaret script. And the one on the right is from the Jordan, further in more in the Middle East. I think there are over like 15 or 16 different scripts like this that have evolved over the centuries, over the generations. Next slide. Let's see how's our time. We got maybe a little while. So this is one of the revelations that, and now we're just really thinking about what is the Quran saying? What is the new message? What is this new message saying? And it's identifying us as the children of Israel, the children of Adam. Bani Adam will be, is the Arabic phrase. And he's telling us about apostles, right? It's informing the believers, the early believers, still informing us, right? How apostles came from us and they're rehearsing signs. So it's telling us about something about the Quran. It's telling us first that Allah is seeing as descendants of the first father, the first Adam, the first man Adam. That's the first information it's conveying. And it's conveying to us that there are apostles being sent from that time with the same message that we're going to want to revert back to the original message and to the aim and purpose of the creation of Adam. And it says that these apostles, they come to rehearse Allah's signs. So Allah is speaking and he's unfolding, he's unveiling his plan. So this is where the Quran, I think we can see it has this universal flavor to it, this universal purpose and aim. So it said those who are righteous men, they laugh. Now we have a focus for the believer in this book and acceptance of this prophet that's going to be focused on a development of a personal nature that Allah is going to oversee and guide us with through Revelation. So the next slide, there's the term wahi, which is the term used for Revelation. This particular slide has a verse, and it names those who have received revelation. Inspiration is the translation. So every word in the verse will be wahi, or some derivative of wahi, and that's the word for inspiration. So that's a beautiful word. And it names all the prophets whom Allah, so it gives us the background for the evolution of the revelation of God and the name. Now, Imam Muhammad mentioned also, and I think that helped us to understand a broader view of the Quran. He said that, and we can see by reading the Quran, that inspiration was also given, as it said, to the mother of Moses. Inspiration, a woman. Inspiration was given to the mother of Jesus, Maryam alayhi salam. So we can see that helps us, and we take that into consideration, that helps us understand really the inspiration, why he means, and what the real nature of inspiration is. It's not something just for men, it's something for the human being, and that's why it can go. It's not specifically relegated to only male of one particular gender. So it indicates the main idea, underlying the idea, directing and guiding some is the nature of the word inspiration. It's just for giving guidance and for directing us in a particular necessary direction. So the prophet means of revelation, that was very interesting. The prophet said, we know in the hadith the prophet mentioned dreams. Revelation can come in a dream, the form of a dream, vision. Moses, we know the example of Moses, the burning bush, words sent through a messenger like the angel Jibril, as we know as the revelation began. So the next slide, we have the Quran is the speech of Allah. I think the phrase Kalimullah, the speech of Allah, through the angel Jibril in its precise meaning and precise wording. And I think when we see as we go on to see as the prophet was directed to collect the Quran in the specific form that Allah guided him to establish it in the correct surahs, in the correct order of the ayats, that he had to have a divine influence. So the angel Jibril actually was involved, as we can see, in the precise meaning and the wording. So Tamatur, this is a beautiful word, transmitted by us through numerous persons. As we have received it, it has come down and said, we mentioned from generation to generation, great Qadis would memorize. Well, it's a tradition, memorization of the Quran, if I'm sure we're all aware of that. It's a tradition in the Muslim community from day one. From this very beginning, the tradition of memorization of the Quran is established in the Muslim community globally. Recently, I was watching one of the international exhibitions, not an exhibition, it's competition. The international competition of the recitation of the Quran. And there were young children from different countries, from Africa, from Middle East, from throughout the world, very young boys and young girls. Imam Qasim remember telling me once that he attended one of these recitation competitions, and the method that they used was they would start reciting, the judges. Of course, they're all Hafiz, of course. They would start reciting and stop, and that's where the contestant would pick up right there. I mean, Tariq could do that, you know. With a surah that we both know.
Yeah.
I could stop, and I guarantee he would start right there where it is. Right. Because as you're reading, you know, right, where we'll go, what has to come next.
Yeah.
Inshallah. Not on a global, no, not Hafiz right. Material, yeah, no, not on that level, right? But as you see how it's preserved, someone way in the back, I'm sure it happened in the time of the Prophet, or the time of Omar. I think I read it once about that. In this recitation, there was a female sister way in the back that corrected him. Yeah, and correct him. So Watchua talks about that preservation, verbally and written. But let's go on to the next slide. The next slide, with the practice of memorization, as we were saying, so we're a little bit ahead of ourselves. That's the hadith of the Prophet. Imam Qasim used to begin each of his Arabic classes with that hadith that says, "Khayrukum man ta'allama al-Quran wa 'allamahu." The best of you is he who learns the Quran and teaches it. So the incentive to memorize the Quran, we know, was there probably was a cultural richness in the atmosphere as the Quran was being revealed. And when a verse was revealed, you know, news would shoot across the city, right? About a new revelation that came to the Prophet. So the most superior among you Muslims are those who learn the Quran and teach it. Quran reciters from among the companions. Who are they? Abu Bakr, the Prophet's very close friend, who was with the Prophet in the cave when they were, not the cave of Hira, but the cave when they were forced to flee, to migrate from Mecca. He was with the Prophet. Omar, we know. Uthman, we won't go through all of them because we know they're very familiar. Ali, very close to the companion. First to accept Islam, Ali ibn Masud. Ibn Masud was very young. You see in the Omar ibn Khattab depiction of this period. He was very young, and he didn't have a lot of, he wasn't upper class. So they just respected him terribly. And he accepted Islam, of course, in Mecca when the tribal leaders were really being brutal against him. So they went out, they felt that it was time for the Quran, the revelation, to be voiced publicly. I think that's in one of the verses, where I rise and proclaim, right? And he went out and they beat him, and they beat him up bad. But they survived it and went back, and they were proud that they had finally went out and took on the Quraysh tribal leaders, right? So they were so proud. He was beat up bad. He said, "If you want, I'll go back tomorrow again." So they wanted to make this. They wanted to let them know we're not going to be just a pushover like that. Abu Hurairah, we know, Abu Hurairah was very young when he became accepted Islam. Abdullah ibn Abbas is known as being one of the great interpreters of the Quran. The older Sahaba, they're very proud of him, Omar particularly. But look who else is on it. Aisha, among the companions who are correct, recited Quran. Hafsa, Salima, Prophet's wives, right? So women also were part of that cultural progression of memorization, that stage memorization of Quran. And that's the man who collected Quran in the time of Prophet. Was he say 4 of all of whom? Oh, these were all Ansar. And I like the idea of the Ansar's role, right? So they invited the Prophet to come to Medina, come and we will protect you. And they vowed, they took their oaths of allegiance to the Bay'ah to the Prophet. But they were also very foremost in Islam, being not just followers, but also in leadership. So in our next slide, where are we? The collection of pages. The term is Jamul Quran, the gathering of the Quran. So this is kind of like the next stage, right? The revelation, piecemeal, companions memorization. They have their own sheets, those who can write, the scribes. But there still has to be a point where these pages have to come together into one Quran, one complete book. And as many of them point out, that even verses of the Quran speak of the Quran as a book, a kitab. So it was inevitable that eventually this Quran, the pages would be gathered as they are here, brought together into one form of the Quran. The Prophet said, call Zayd. I like this hadith. He said, call Zayd, to prayers and peace upon him. Call Zayd for me and let him bring the board, the ink pot, and the scapular bone, which probably is what they made the letters, did the letters with. And so then he said, write such and such a thing. So it's direct dictation of the Quran from the Prophet, prayers and peace upon him, to the companions, to the scribes that were working very close with him in the recording of the Quran. So learning the Quran by heart, as I said, is a hafiz. It means to preserve it, preserving it in the memory. It has been preserved in the memory, which probably sometimes, maybe most of the time, or maybe all the time, could be more accurate than on paper. So people can write different things down, as they had to sort through all the different paper of those sheets that the companions. And that was a very dramatic moment. Bringing together materials upon which the Quran has been written. As I said, they had different mediums of material, bones, I said, leaves, and such as that. To bring together reports of people who have memorized the Quran, or the Hafiz. To bring together all such sources, both oral and written. Let's see now. The next slide, okay, the order and arrangement, which would be a major issue, wouldn't it? Uthman said in the latter days, the Prophet used to, when something was revealed, call someone from among those who used to write for him and say, place this ayah in this surah. So it's not helter-skelter. We don't know where it goes, but the Prophet prayers, he knew where it was to go. As I told you, Imam, what's the brother's name who pointed out? Arabic scholar, Arabic teacher, who pointed about the middle of the Quran. The verse that says Ummatul Wusta, the midway community, is located directly in the middle of the Quran. And there are other signs, but his point, this is being one of those signs that is not helter-skelter here, right? There is a definite force behind it that's saying where these things, this is going to be exact. It's going to end up exact. Place this ayah in surah, which this and this is mentioned. So the Prophet he directed them. Prophet self-instructed scribes as to where the different revealed verses should be placed. And we know it's been preserved, of course, as we know it, so the Hafiz and over the tradition in the Muslim communities, starting with the very earliest age. The next slide is this distinction between Suhuf and Mushaf. Suhuf is what we're working with right now when we're talking about the loose pieces of writing, but the Musaf is when it becomes collected. And that's when we reach the period of Uthman. Now, I guess we can abbreviate, we might have to abbreviate. Suhuf, for definition in history, is written text, stands for the sheets on which Quran was collected during the time of Abu Bakr. Anyone remember that historical scene?
Which one?
There was a battle, and a lot of the Hafiz were killed. And it was Omar, when he heard about this, he went to it's when the thought occurred to him, if the Hafiz die off, the Quran dies off. And it was a large, which also tells us that the practice of memorizing the Quran was widespread, that you would have that many in one battle. And what did Abu Bakr say? He said, I cannot do something that the Rasulullah never did. He said, I cannot bring in, he feared it would be bid'ah, a deviation. He was just that close to the Prophet, very close, and very close to his wishes and how he really felt about the religion. And there's other scenes that depict that, show that they disagreed with Abu Bakr on, but Abu Bakr said, no, I think this is the prophet's position and I cannot abandon it. But in this particular case, he kept, of course, Omar being the Omar he is, right? He was persuasive, and Omar Abu Bakr, and he saw what he was saying. And he said, okay, I will consent to gathering the sheets, going to all those that memorized and bringing them together, gathering sheets. And so who the best one to head that up? Zayd bin Thabit. So he called for Zayd bin Thabit. There's a beautiful hadith where he begins to tell this story. And he's so emotional. He said, Abu Bakr, he said, he sent for me. He didn't know what it was for, but when he got there, he got to his tent, and Abu Bakr was there standing. So Omar was sitting in the back with his head down, on a very solemn mood. So he felt there was something very tense going on. So he said, when Abu Bakr asked him, so we want you to gather all of the collected verses and sheets and suhuf that have been recorded on pages and bring them together and start the process of sorting to them and getting and separating those and completing with just one complete volume, no duplicates. He, of course, said the same thing. Abu Bakr said, how can I do something that the Prophet present never did? But eventually they all saw that the responsibility was on them to do it, and it could not really be on anyone else. No one else could have addressed that, met that obligation. That was for the future, as we are we're the beneficiaries of it today. So the Mus'haf, the sheets on which the Quran was collected in the time of Uthman. Abu Bakr, during Abu Bakr's time, when they collected them all together, but during the time of Uthman is when they collected all the ones that were in perfect agreement, and they got Uthman had to get rid of all the other ones, to burn those that were not in, because there was a system that he used, check and recheck and double check before it became finalized. And in this, the unique feature, the one the Mus'haf during Abu Uthman's time was these were added, the ayat, identification of the ayats, identification of the surah. On the next slide, and I think we may be able to conclude here, I guess, on this slide, because this is the final Mus'haf that Uthman oversaw it and completed it, and the copy that he sent it to different centers in the Islamic world. This one is in Turkey. I think we've had some believers visit Turkey. I don't know if they've been to the Topkapi Museum, but this is a copy of that very finished of the Quran. And this, they will tell you, is identical with the Quran we're reading today. It's identical. It's been checked, of course, and rechecked and researched. It's been recited and memorized throughout the Muslim world. And this is, the consistency is there from the Mus'haf of Uthman. So that's what continues. So I guess in conclusion, we can see that the study of the Quran is more of a study of the Quran, the history of the development of the Quran, more than it is kind of a science. But sciences have come from the Quran. Of course, tafsir, we could say, is a science. Of course, recitation is a science. And of course, it's been studied for many other different ways. The next slide, I guess, let me see just to see what, these were what we just mentioned before, the battle that inspired Abu Bakr, moved Omar to say we have to codify the Quranic sheets into one. And then the next slide, I think I may have had one more. We talked about the Meccan verses, Medina verses, abrogated verses. A sample of an abrogated verse would be what?
Do not come to prayer.
That's a good one. That's a classic one.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Which means it had not been prohibited yet. It was just forbidden or limited use. Don't come to prayer with it. And then the next verse that abrogated, the abrogating verse would be Amalu Shaitan, the works of Satan. Gambling and intoxicants are the works of the Satan. So that abrogates this. That's what is meant by abrogating. No longer could you drink and can go to because your Muslim was allowed to drink. It'd be haram, and the legal scholars, of course, would definitely, because of the abrogation, have to classify drinking as haram. And intoxicants. And then they will scrutinize, right, what comes under the topic of intoxicants. Clear and unclear versus mention those translation interpretation. What's our next slide? And so I think I had one more. Yeah, this is a good place to end. Well, maybe we'll okay, we're gonna got a couple more here. This is just a sample. Talking about the Quran in 21st century. This was a book written by Bruce Lawrence. I don't know if anybody knows Bruce Lawrence. He was a professor at Duke University. Interviewed Imam before, but he dedicated this chapter of his book to Imam W. Muhammad. And in particular verse, of course, we know the verse, Lord of all the systems of knowledge. He particularly loved this particular interpretation by a translation interpreted by the Imam. He saw so much in that he really dedicated this, the heart of this chapter to that. And I think this is the next verse, next slide, I think pretty much closes this out. Alhamdulillah. Khalas. Ramadan Mubarak.
Takbir.
Allahu Akbar.
Takbir.
Allahu Akbar.
Takbir.
Do we have any comments from online?
This was very useful, Imam Rabbani. Thank you for this presentation.
It's just a general outline. You're welcome.
Indeed, that was a great presentation.
It's just a big part, Dr. Ramadan.
I said, indeed, that was a great presentation.
Alhamdulillah.
Thank you.
Just going over the sources, the Prophet prayers and peace be upon him says the obligation on every believer to seek knowledge. And he also said the knowledge does not come to you, you have to go to it. So we want our next generation to be much more learned in the religion than we are. Hopefully we will produce some hafiz, as we are presently have some hafiz, young hafiz in training, don't we? We're honored to have them lead us in Taraweeh prayer during Ramadan. Yeah.
About the situation of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, going into the cave, the significance of him going to the cave. Isolation from distractions and allowing the message to be received.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a beautiful thought. Allah knew exactly where it was. So really, no matter where you go, you're not away completely, right? You're not away from God. But that solace, that I think that the soul, right, is much freer from the extractions of the world. And that's what the challenge is. That's the blessing, the aim of the Quran is to create the Muslim life in the world that exists. The life in Medina, Mecca at the time, was not the life environment for a believer. But but because of the nature, the original, that's why we see the beginning, a lot of the references to Adam. And we know the scene with Adam. He's being created. He's been presented to the angels as one who will have a major role in the responsibility of the creation. So we see the revelation is the completion of the previous revelations. It's conclusion, development and conclusion of the previous revelation. Khatam Nabi, the prophet is Khatam Nabi, the seal of prophethood. Something all of us related to what came before. But definitely, I think it's good to think about the situation in Medina at the time, in Mecca at the time of the prophet, what the social circumstances were. What was the social circumstance? What was social rights, social justice? What did it look like? Were the people progressive or were they regressive? What was their educational interests, right? As a human being, were they fulfilling their life as a human being? Was the original person being evolved? It was being studied. And all of it, as what the Quran is one of the main, teachings of the Quran is Tawheed, of course. So obviously that is the main essence that was missing from that caused this decline, this retarded social state. The bearing of girl babies, that's obviously a very deteriorating psychosis, social standard, and the false pride, and all those kind of things. But there's much to learn, as Quran is a book for all times, that our role responsibility is, of course, application for the science for the Quran, Quranic knowledge, Quranic aim and purpose as a tool for reforming life and family and community. So it's a reform movement, definitely a reform movement. Anyone online got any comments? Feel free. You may have read something in the readings during this month that related to the study of the Quran. Of course, I think interpretation, of course, is to be digested, right? To be read and understood. So in the reading, it's a beautiful practice that we have of reading together, studying together, the group. There's an extra force that comes in the group, as indicated in the saying of the prophet about prayer. Prayer said in congregation has 20 degrees more, right, value than when said alone. So it's the collective power and strength that, and the Quran, of course, is the Hajj, is another example of the Quran. It's a product of the Quran. The Hajj, the pilgrimage, is a product. These are manifestations or expressions of the religious revelation. The Hajj. We go there because Allah revealed to Abraham to establish that house, and that it continues to serve as our Qibla for our prayer globally, Muslims around the world, globally. It's beautiful. I pray Allah one day I can make Umrah in the month of Ramadan. The Prophet said there's great blessings, multiple blessings for that. So thank you all for your attention. If no one has any further comments.
Thank you so much for the presentation, Imam Rabbani. One thing I do want to mention is as folks who are not native Arabic speakers, listening to a presentation about the importance of and the value of the Quran, its revelation, its instruction, and everything that's come from it. We should take special, I don't know if pride is the right word or not, but really be enthusiastic about the challenge and all the blessings that come along with us endeavoring to learn the language of the Quran, and accepting whatever pace that Allah gives us, in that study. But every step that we make, in that journey, inshallah, it just deepens our appreciation and our relationship with it. So, thank you again.
Yeah, I think it helps to create that bond with the Quran, the language. Yeah. Even like you said, any level, any pace, and just the familiarity of the Arabic letters, I see enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Take the strangeness away from it, right?
Yeah.
Rabbani.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Yes, sir.
Could you make some comments on the etiquette of the Quran, how we should handle it, how the book itself, the regard and the reverence to the book. Do we need to be in wudu?
Yes, you should be in wudu. And no one will recite the Quran who wasn't in wudu with it. No one will recite the Quran because it's an act of worship. We recite the Quran in our prayers. So if it's to be recited in the prayer, that means it's a very sacred meeting, very sacred meeting. Yes, hands should be clean. I think that's wash your hands. Yeah. And that depiction of Omar ibn Khattab, when he busted in on his sister, he heard the Quran being recited. He was moved to the core of his being. He wanted to read it. He wanted to see it. She told him to go and wash his hands. And it was just a couple of sheets. She also was a little angry because I think she had punched her husband. He had been kind of rough. Yes, but we should do the word of Allah. Good point. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad gave us ways also of respect for the Quran. Bashir?
Yes.
Right?
Right.
We're talking about
yeah.
We're talking about mothership time. It was mothership. It was Yaqub time. Mothership, all of that. But still, the Quran was separated from. It was kind of separated from Farad, right? Bashir.
Yes.
Wasn't the Quran separated even from Farad, distinguished from Farad Muhammad? How? She gave us a picture of Farad holding the Quran. So he was reading the Quran. The Quran was his book as well. But yes, but we'll talk to you, wash your hands. Always, and never carry the Quran below your waist. We walk with the Quran, never let it go below your waist. And to keep it in the highest place in the shelf. Yaqub's history and all that, the Quran was still above everything. So it was good orientation for us. And of course, all of us always say, because of my generation, we were taught, Muhammad would say, I'm not here to teach you. Someone else is going to do that. So it always gave us that future where we would be much more in order with this traditions conventionally. Yeah,
I had researched a little bit of this a day ago. Some things that I had not been aware of, but I had read that too, that when reading, we should be facing the Qibla, and we should hold the book in our right hand. I know some of these things are rituals and have some meaning, but that was two things that a couple of things that I recently came across. I don't know if you were aware of that, or you want to make some comments on it.
No, I'm not aware of that.
Okay.
I never heard any well-regarded scholars saying that.
Yeah.
Okay.
We expect that. We expect to hear different versions of everything from human beings. But the beautiful thing about it was the point we wanted to make from this brief outline of the Quran was that it was the Muslim community's role in preserving the Quran. It's not the ritual, right? The ritual, it was the active role in thinking, the initiative of the followers of Muhammad, why we had the Quran today. When he passed, he left it with them. He said, I leave you with two things. It became our responsibility. Allah says in the Quran, when I hear things like that, I always go, are you tested with the Quran? If it doesn't pass the Quranic test, you can leave it where it was, I would say. And Allah says what? Whichever way you turn is the face of Allah. So why has he got me to, now he gonna put me on this new restriction this so much, maybe enthusiastic, maybe, just a little extreme. We have those times, right? But whichever way you turn is the face of God. Allah just uses his face as a metaphor, right? So we can read the Quran because it's the words of Allah.
Brother Rabbani, Brother Rabbani, I know we're out of time. I'm looking at a list of instructions on how to use and care for the Quran. You may have mentioned this. I stepped away for a minute. But one of the things we also mentioned was that we should not carry the Quran in an unclean place for reading.
Yeah.
Alhamdulillah.
Well, we're out of time now.
Yes, we thank Imam Rabbani again for his presentation. And we thank everyone for joining us in real time. For those who will come behind and view this program on our YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed, please do so. Masjid Taqwa Chicago. That's our YouTube channel. So subscribe and please do share. And we will see you next time, inshallah. We will close up now with Surah Al-Asr. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal Asr. Innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawassaw bil haqqi wa tawassaw bis sabr. All right. Assalamu alaikum, everybody.